Have you ever shown kindness to someone when everyone else had already given up on them? Maybe you saw something in them that others missed, something beneath the chaos and anger that hinted at pain rather than malice. Think about where you're from, your city or state. Would people there have walked away, or would they have taken the risk like the woman in this story? That choice, that single moment of compassion, can change everything. The crystal chandelier above table 12 cast prismatic light across the white linen tablecloth, and Minji adjusted the wine glasses with practiced precision. Celestine was the kind of restaurant where perfection wasn't just expected, it was mandatory. Each place setting had to be exact, each fold of the napkin identical, each piece of silverware aligned just so. She'd been working double shifts for 3 months now, her feet aching in the required designer heels, her smile professionally warm even when exhaustion threatened to crack through the facade. At 24, she'd become an expert at hiding how tired she was. The other servers didn't know about the hospital bills stacking up on her kitchen counter, didn't know that her younger brother Tay was recovering from his second surgery in 6 months, didn't know that their parents had been gone for 4 years, and she'd been holding everything together alone ever since. They just saw Minji, the composed server who never complained, who picked up extra shifts without being asked, who somehow made even the most demanding customers leave satisfied. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversation of Los Angeles elite. Celestine specialized in Korean fusion cuisine, the kind of elevated dining where a single plate cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering cityscape, and the interior was all modern minimalism with touches of traditional Korean aesthetics. Black lacquered surfaces, white walls, strategic pops of crimson. Beautiful and cold and expensive. Minji was refilling water glasses at table 8 when the hostess, Claire, appeared at her elbow with a tight expression that immediately set off warning bells. Claire had worked at Celestine for 5 years, and nothing rattled her. But right now, her perfectly made-up face was tense with barely concealed panic. "We have a situation," Claire murmured in Korean, her voice low enough that nearby diners couldn't hear. Table 15. The reservation was under the name Huang. Minji glanced toward the corner table, and her stomach dropped. 3 young men in expensive suits were settling in, and even from across the restaurant, she could tell something was off. The one in the middle, mid-20s with artfully styled black hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the glassy, unfocused look in his eyes, was already gesturing aggressively at the sommelier. His voice carried across the dining room. Too loud, the Korean words slurring slightly. "Is he drunk?" Minji asked quietly. "Very," Claire confirmed. "Management wants you to handle it. They said you're good with difficult situations." Minji wanted to argue that there was a difference between handling a customer who complained about their steak temperature and managing someone who was clearly intoxicated and growing more agitated by the second. But she needed this job, needed the money from these shifts, so she simply nodded and made her way toward table 15 with her professional smile firmly in place. As she approached, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The man in the middle, the drunk one, suddenly swept his arm across the table in a violent arc. A wine glass toppled, sending Bordeaux cascading across the white linen like blood. The women at the neighboring table gasped and recoiled as red liquid splattered toward them. "This place is shit," the man announced in Korean, his words thick and angry. "Overpriced shit for pretentious assholes." His companions, clearly enablers rather than friends, laughed nervously and tried to calm him down without much conviction. One of them, a thin man with glasses, made a half-hearted attempt to right the fallen glass. The other, stockier with a scar across his eyebrow, just looked bored, like this was a regular occurrence. Minji reached the table and immediately began damage control, her hands moving efficiently to contain the spreading wine with extra napkins she'd grabbed on her way over. "Sir," she said in Korean, her voice calm and measured, "let me help you with that. We can get you a fresh table setting and anything else you need." The man's eyes, dark and bloodshot and rimmed with something that looked like barely contained rage, focused on her. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 26 or 27. His suit was clearly custom-tailored. His watch alone probably cost more than she made in a year, but there was something deeply wrong beneath the expensive exterior. His hands were shaking, she noticed, trembling so hard, he had to clench them into fists to hide it. I don't need your help, he spat, but there was something hollow in his voice, something that didn't quite match the aggression. I don't need anything from this fucking place. More diners were turning now, phones emerging from designer purses, no doubt ready to record whatever happened next. Minji could see the manager, Richard, speaking urgently into his cell phone near the kitchen entrance. Security, probably. Or maybe the police. This was about to get very bad very fast. The drunk man stood abruptly, his chair scraping back with a harsh sound that made everyone within earshot flinch. He grabbed a plate of appetizers, some delicate arrangement of sashimi and microgreens that had probably taken the chef 20 minutes to compose, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the far wall, leaving a smear of wasabi and fish across the pristine white surface. Jay, stop, the man with glasses said weakly, but he made no move to actually intervene. So his name was Jay. Minji filed that information away as she watched him reach for another plate. 2 security guards in dark suits were making their way through the dining room now, their expressions professionally neutral, but their intent clear. They were going to remove him forcibly, and given how drunk and volatile he was, it wouldn't be gentle. But Minji saw something that made her pause, made her do something incredibly stupid instead of stepping back like any sensible person would have done. She saw the way Jay's hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the plate. She saw the way his eyes were rimmed with red that might have been from alcohol, but looked more like he'd been crying. She saw the tension in his shoulders that spoke of someone barely holding himself together, not someone looking for a fight. Everyone else in the restaurant saw chaos and entitled rage. Minji saw pain. She stepped forward, directly into Jay's space, close enough that the security guards hesitated. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, adrenaline making her hyper-aware of every detail. The expensive cologne he wore that couldn't quite mask the smell of whiskey. The way his chest was rising and falling too quickly, like he couldn't get enough air. The muscle jumping in his jaw as he clenched his teeth. Are you okay? She asked quietly in Korean, the question so unexpected that Jay actually froze, the plate still gripped in his white-knuckled hands. What? His voice came out rough, confused. Are you okay? She repeated, gentler this time, meeting his eyes directly. You look like you're hurting. For a moment, maybe 3 seconds that felt suspended in amber, everything stopped. The security guards paused mid-approach. The other diners held their collective breath. Jay's friends stared at Minji like she'd lost her mind. And Jay himself just looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, and something in his expression cracked. The plate slipped from his fingers and landed on the table with a clatter rather than shattering on the floor. His aggression seemed to drain away all at once, leaving him looking lost and younger than his years. His hands were still shaking. He started, then stopped, seeming unable to find words. Why don't you sit down, Minji suggested, her voice still calm and low, pitched just for him. Let me get you some water. We can figure this out. The security guards were close now, ready to grab him, but Minji held up one hand in a small gesture that asked them to wait. She had no authority to make that request, was just a server who could be fired for interfering, but something in her expression must have conveyed certainty, because they actually stopped. Jay allowed himself to be guided back into his chair. He slumped there, all the fight gone, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion so deep it had settled into his bones. Minji signaled another server to bring water, and began efficiently cleaning up the mess at the table, her movements practiced and soothing in their normalcy. What's your name? Jay asked suddenly, his voice much quieter now, almost hoarse. Minji, he repeated, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. Why are you being nice to me? Everyone else here wants me gone. She met his eyes again and saw genuine confusion there, like kindness was so foreign to him that he couldn't comprehend it. Maybe you needed someone to ask if you're okay, instead of just assuming you're not worth asking. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she saw something raw and vulnerable flash across his features before he looked away. His friends were watching with obvious shock, apparently unused to seeing Jay respond to anything but aggression or indulgence. The water arrived, and Minji set it in front of him. Drink this. You'll feel a little better. He obeyed mechanically, and she noticed his hands were steadier now, the shaking subsiding as his breathing began to even out. The restaurant around them was slowly returning to normal, Other diners going back to their meals with the occasional glance toward the corner table, the entertainment apparently over. Minji was about to excuse herself, to give him space and hopefully keep her job despite the scene, when the front entrance opened and a presence entered that changed the entire atmosphere of the room. She felt it before she saw him, the way every staff member suddenly stood straighter, the way the ambient noise level dropped by several decibels. The man who walked through Celestine's entrance was in his early 50s, dressed in a charcoal suit that made everyone else's expensive clothing look cheap by comparison. His salt and pepper hair was immaculately styled, his posture radiating the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. He was flanked by two men in dark suits who were clearly bodyguards, and the hostess looked terrified as she tried to greet him. But it was his face that made Minji's blood run cold. Handsome in a severe way, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She'd seen enough Korean dramas, heard enough whispered stories from other Korean Americans in LA, to recognize what she was looking at. This was someone powerful in ways that had nothing to do with legitimate business. The man's gaze swept the restaurant and landed immediately on their table, on Jay slumped in his chair with Minji standing beside him. Something flickered across his expression, too quick to identify, before his face settled back into neutral assessment. He crossed the dining room in measured strides, and Minji felt her pulse spike again. Jay saw his approach and visibly tensed, his jaw tightening, but he didn't stand or try to run. The friends scrambled to their feet, bowing deeply, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. The man stopped at their table and addressed Jay in Korean, his voice quiet, but carrying an edge that made it clear this was not a request. "Get up. We're leaving." Jay stood slowly, swaying slightly, and Minji had to resist the urge to steady him. This was clearly not her business, not her world, and she needed to step back before she made things worse. But then the man's attention shifted to her, his dark eyes assessing her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You calm my son down." His Korean was formal, educated, the kind spoken by someone who'd grown up in Seoul's wealthiest districts. "The manager told me you prevented this situation from escalating further." Minji started, then stopped, unsure what to say. "I just tried to help." "Your name?" "Minji Kong." He studied her for another long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he was cataloging everything about her. From her server's uniform to the small gold cross she wore on a chain to the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide in her eyes. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim wallet, extracting several bills that Minji recognized as hundreds. "For the damages," he said, handing them to the hovering manager who'd appeared at his elbow. "And for the disruption to your establishment's evening. It won't happen again." The manager accepted the money with obvious relief and multiple assurances that everything was fine. No problem at all. These things happen. Minji suspected that was significantly more money than the actual damages required, which meant it was payment for silence and discretion. The man placed a hand on Jay's shoulder, not roughly but with clear command, and began steering him toward the exit. Jay looked back at Minji as he was guided away, his expression difficult to read. Gratitude maybe, or confusion, or something else entirely. Just before they reached the door, the man paused and turned back. He caught Minji's eye across the restaurant and gave her the smallest nod, a gesture that felt weighted with meaning she couldn't decipher. Acknowledgement, maybe, or something more like a claim, like he'd noted her existence and filed it away for future reference. Then they were gone, and Minji was left standing beside table 15 with red wine still staining the tablecloth, and her heart still racing, and the absolute certainty that her life had just become very complicated in ways she didn't yet understand. 3 days passed before Minji returned to Celestine. 3 days during which she'd convinced herself that the incident with Jay had been a strange aberration, something she could file away and forget. She'd spent those days at the hospital with Tae, watching him sleep in the recovery room after a minor procedure, counting the pills he needed to take, and trying not to think about the bills that kept arriving with numbers that made her stomach clench. The restaurant looked exactly the same when she walked through the staff entrance, all gleaming surfaces and the faint scent of expensive ingredients being prepared in the kitchen. But something felt different, a tension in the air that she couldn't quite identify. The other servers kept glancing at her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that might have been envy. Claire intercepted her before she could even tie on her apron. "Richard wants to see you in his office." Minji's heart sank. This was it then. She was being let go. Management had decided that her involvement in the incident, however well-intentioned, was a liability they couldn't afford. She'd probably get some polite speech about how they appreciated her service, but felt it was best to part ways. And then she'd be jobless with a brother who needed medications that cost more per month than most people's rent. She climbed the stairs to Richard's office with legs that felt heavy, rehearsing in her mind how she'd ask for at least 2 weeks severance, how she'd explain that she needed time to find another position. But when she entered the minimalist office, Richard didn't look angry or apologetic. He looked nervous. "Minji, sit down please," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his pristine desk. His fingers drummed against the glass surface, a tell she'd never seen from him before. Richard was always composed, always in control. She sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. "Am I being terminated?" "What? No, nothing like that." He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie even though it was already perfectly straight. "We received a very generous payment from the Huang family for the incident the other night. Very generous. More than covered the damages, and then some." "Okay," Minji said slowly, not understanding why this required a private meeting. "And this morning, we received a call from someone representing the family. They've requested that you be the one to serve table 7 this evening. Specifically you." The words took a moment to sink in, and when they did, Minji felt her pulse spike. Table 7. One of the best tables in the house, positioned by the windows with a view of the entire city. Why would they request me? Richard spread his hands in a gesture of bewilderment. "I have no idea, but the reservation is under Jay Huang's name, and the caller was very clear that your presence was part of their dining experience." He paused, studying her face. "Minji, I don't know what happened the other night beyond what I saw, but the Huang family is not the kind of family you say no to. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She understood perfectly. The Huang family was connected, powerful in ways that operated outside normal channels of authority. Refusing their request would be bad for the restaurant and potentially dangerous for her. But more than that, she found herself curious. Why would Jay come back? Why would he ask for her specifically? "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll take the table." Relief washed over Richard's features. Good. They have a 7:30 reservation. Be professional, be courteous, and if anything seems off, you come find me immediately." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparation and mounting anxiety. Minji went through the motions of her pre-shift tasks, polishing silverware and reviewing the evening's menu. But her mind kept circling back to Jay. The way he'd looked at her when she asked if he was okay, like no one had asked him that in years. The shaking in his hands. The grief that had been so obvious once she'd looked past the anger. 7:30 arrived with the inevitability of a ticking clock. Minji was checking table 7's setup for the 3rd time when the hostess appeared with a single guest in tow, and Minji's breath caught despite herself. Jay looked completely different. Gone was the glassy-eyed drunk throwing plates across the restaurant. The man approaching her table was groomed impeccably, his dark hair styled with careful precision, his suit a deep navy that probably cost more than her car. His face, no longer flushed and contorted with rage, was striking in a way she hadn't fully registered before. Sharp jawline, full lips, dark eyes that were clear and focused and fixed directly on her. He looked like money and power and danger all wrapped in expensive wool, and Minji felt her professional composure waver for just a moment before she recovered. "Good evening," she said in Korean, her voice steady even as her heart raced. "Welcome to Celestine." Minji. Her name and his voice sounded different than she'd expected, softer, like he was tasting something unfamiliar. "Thank you for agreeing to serve me tonight. I know it must have seemed like a strange request." She gestured for him to sit, and he did, moving with a fluid grace that suggested complete comfort in his own body. Not drunk now, not falling apart, just controlled and present, and watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Can I start you with something to drink?" she asked, falling back on her server training because it gave her something to do with her hands, a script to follow. "Water is fine. I'm not drinking tonight." He paused, and something like shame flickered across his features. "I don't drink often." The other night was unusual circumstances. Minji nodded and moved to pour his water, hyper-aware of his eyes tracking her movements. When she set the glass down, their fingers almost brushed, and she pulled back quickly, professionally. Your server will be back shortly to discuss tonight's menu. I don't want to discuss the menu, Jay said quietly. I came here to talk to you. To apologize. That stopped her. She'd expected many things, but not this, not the raw sincerity in his voice. You don't need to apologize to me. I was just doing my job. No. He shook his head, and she noticed the way his jaw tightened, like what he was about to say was difficult. You did more than your job. You saw me having the worst night of my life, and you asked if I was okay. Do you know how many people were in that restaurant? Minji thought back. Maybe 60? 60 people, and you were the only one who asked. Everyone else just wanted me gone, wanted the problem removed so they could go back to their expensive meals. But you looked at me like I was a person, not a problem. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping lower. That meant something. She should step back, should maintain professional distance, but something in his expression held her in place. The other night was the 10-year anniversary of my mother's death, he continued, and Minji felt her chest tighten with unexpected empathy. She was killed when I was 16, murdered by a rival organization that wanted to hurt my father. The words were delivered matter-of-factly, but Minji could hear the pain underneath them, could see it in the way his hands clenched briefly before he forced them to relax. I'm sorry, she said, meaning it. That's unbearable. I've spent a decade trying to be what my father needs me to be. The heir, the weapon, the ruthless businessman who doesn't flinch at violence. But every year on that day, I remember that I'm also just someone who watched his mother bleed out on a restaurant floor while people screamed and ran. He met her eyes directly. I was falling apart that night, and you were the first person in years who seemed to see the person underneath the chaos. Minji's throat felt tight. She didn't know what to say, how to respond to such raw honesty from someone who was essentially a stranger. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand that I'm not just the drunk asshole throwing plates. I'm broken in a lot of ways, but I'm trying. And your compassion, your kindness, it reminded me that maybe I'm not completely lost. Jay paused, seeming to gather himself. I want to see you again. Outside of this restaurant. I want to spend time with someone who looks at me like I'm worth asking about. The request hung in the air between them, and Minji felt torn between wariness and an unexpected pull of attraction. This was dangerous. He was dangerous, connected to a world of violence and crime that she wanted no part of. But he was also clearly in pain, clearly lonely, and she understood loneliness intimately. I don't think that's a good idea, she said carefully. You don't know anything about me. I know more than you think. His voice was gentle, but there was something underneath it that made her stomach flip. My father has resources, and he was curious about the woman who calmed his son down. I know your parents died 4 years ago in a car accident. I know you became guardian to your younger brother Tae, who's 18 now. I know he's had 2 surgeries in the last 6 months for a chronic kidney condition and that you're drowning in medical debt. Minji took a step back, her professional composure cracking. You had me investigated? In my world, kindness is so rare that when it appears, we need to know if it's genuine or calculated. He held up a hand as she started to protest. I know how that sounds. I know it's invasive and wrong by normal standards. But my world isn't normal, and the people in my life are there because they want something from me or my father. You're the first person in years who helped me without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. Her mind was racing, anger mixing with fear, mixing with something else she didn't want to name. You should leave. Your brother needs another surgery, Jay continued, his voice still maddeningly calm. The doctors are recommending it within the next 3 months. It's going to cost somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 even with your insurance, and you're already behind on payments from the last procedure. Stop, Minji said, but her voice came out weak. I want to make you an offer. Spend time with me. Have dinners. Let me take you places. Talk to me like you did that night. In exchange, all of Tae's medical expenses will be covered. Every bill, every medication, every future surgery. He'll get the best care available. The words hit her like a physical blow. She should be offended, should throw the offer back in his face. This was essentially trying to buy her time, her companionship. But the number he'd mentioned, 80 to 100,000, that was more money than she'd see in years of double shifts. That was her brother's life. You're trying to buy me, she said, testing the words. No, I'm trying to buy time with someone genuine. There's a difference. Jay's expression was earnest, almost pleading. I'm not asking for anything physical, anything you're not comfortable with. I just want to be around someone who sees me as a person. Someone who might ask if I'm okay on the bad days. Is that really so terrible? Minji felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. This is insane. I don't even know you. So get to know me. Or don't. Just spend time with me and let me help your brother. You don't have to like me, don't have to care about me. Just be present. That's all I'm asking. She wanted to say no, wanted to maintain her pride and her boundaries and her sense of what was right. But she thought about Tay in that hospital bed, thought about the way he'd smiled at her last week and told her not to worry so much when she knew he was in constant pain. Thought about the stack of bills on her counter that she couldn't pay, the collection calls she'd stopped answering. I need time to think about this, she finally said. Take all the time you need. Jay reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the table between them. My personal number. Call me when you decide. Minji looked at the card but didn't pick it up. What if I say no? Then I'll respect that. Your brother's next bill will still be paid, no strings attached, because you showed me kindness when you didn't have to. But I hope you say yes. He stood then, leaving several $100 bills on the table even though he hadn't ordered anything beyond water. For your time, he said. And Minji, I know this all sounds calculated and cold, but I promise you, the desire to know you better is the most genuine thing I've felt in a very long time. Then he was gone, walking out of the restaurant with that same controlled grace, and Minji was left staring at his business card and feeling like her carefully constructed life had just tilted on its axis. The rest of her shift passed in a fog. She went through the motions, smiled at customers, delivered food, but her mind was elsewhere. $80,000. Maybe more. Tay's future. All in exchange for spending time with a man who was clearly dangerous, clearly connected to organized crime, but who also looked at her like she was something precious and rare. When her shift ended at 11, she walked to her car in the restaurant's private lot, her feet aching and her mind churning. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the black sedan that pulled out behind her as she exited onto the street. Almost. But Minji had lived in LA long enough to develop situational awareness, and something about the way the car maintained exactly 3 car lengths behind her, matching her turns, made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She took a random turn, then another, testing. The sedan followed. Her heart started hammering. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? A car was driving on the same street she was. She headed toward her apartment in Koreatown, hoping she was being paranoid, but the sedan stayed with her the entire way. When she pulled into her building's parking structure, the sedan drove past without slowing, and Minji sat in her car for 5 minutes trying to calm her breathing. Probably nothing. Probably her imagination running wild after Jay's revelations about his dangerous world. But when she climbed the stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment and reached her door, she froze. The door was closed, locked from the outside, everything appearing normal. Except the small piece of tape she'd started placing at the bottom of the door, a habit from when she'd lived in a worse neighborhood, was broken. Someone had opened her door. Her hands shook as she unlocked it, half expecting someone to be waiting inside. But the apartment was empty. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it that morning. Her laptop on the coffee table, the dishes in the sink, Tay's textbooks stacked by the couch from his last visit. Except nothing was quite right. Her laptop was angled differently. The stack of mail on the counter had been moved, just slightly. The bathroom cabinet was open a crack when she always kept it closed. Someone had been here, had gone through her things carefully and methodically, and the message was clear. We know where you live. We know about you. We're watching. Minji sank onto her couch, Jay's business card still in her purse, and realized with cold clarity that saying no to his offer wouldn't make her safe. Someone already knew about their connection, was already sending warnings. The danger was here whether she accepted his help or not. But if she said yes, at least Tay would be taken care of. At least something good would come from whatever she'd inadvertently stepped into that night at Celestine when she'd asked a broken man if he was okay. She pulled out her phone, stared at the business card for a long moment, and then dialed the number before she could change her mind. Jay answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. Minji, I have conditions, she said without preamble. I keep my job at the restaurant. This stays respectful. You keep your word about Tay's medical expenses. And if I ever want to walk away, you let me. There was a pause, and she could almost hear him processing her change of heart. Agreed. All of it. When can I see you? Tomorrow night. But Jay, there's something you should know. She took a breath. Someone followed me home tonight. Someone was in my apartment. His voice changed instantly, going cold and hard in a way that should have frightened her, but somehow felt protective instead. Are you safe right now? I think so. They're gone. I'm sending someone to watch your building tonight. Don't argue. It's not negotiable. Tomorrow I'm picking you up at 7. Pack a bag. You're staying somewhere safer until I figure out who's targeting you. Minji wanted to protest, wanted to maintain her independence, but the memory of her disturbed apartment was too fresh. Okay, Minji. His voice softened. Thank you for giving me a chance. She ended the call and sat in her violated apartment, wondering what she'd just agreed to and knowing with absolute certainty that her life would never be the same. Outside her window, Los Angeles glittered with a million lights, beautiful and dangerous and full of secrets. Just like the man whose world she was about to enter. The black Mercedes arrived at exactly 7 the following evening, sleek and expensive and impossible to miss on her street in Koreatown. Minji had spent the day in a state of controlled anxiety, calling the hospital to confirm that yes, Tay's outstanding balance had been paid in full. Yes, his upcoming surgery was scheduled and covered completely, and no, they didn't know who the benefactor was. The relief in the billing department coordinator's voice had been palpable. Apparently, the Huang family paid very well for discretion. Tay had been confused and delighted in equal measure when she'd visited him that afternoon. Someone anonymous paid everything, she'd told him, which was technically true. He'd been too relieved to question it deeply, too happy about finally getting the surgery that would hopefully end his chronic pain. She'd hugged him tight and tried not to think about the price she was paying for his health. The driver who opened the Mercedes door for her was professional and silent, dressed in a dark suit that screamed security rather than chauffeur. Minji slid into the leather interior with her overnight bag, feeling like she was stepping into a different world. The car smelled like expensive cologne and new leather, and classical music played softly from invisible speakers. They drove west toward the hills, leaving behind the dense urban sprawl of Koreatown for winding roads and gated communities. The houses grew larger and more isolated, perched on hillsides with views of the city sprawling below. When they finally stopped, it was in front of a modern building of glass and steel that seemed to hang suspended over Los Angeles. All clean lines and dramatic angles. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor, and when Jay opened the door to greet her, Minji had to work to keep her expression neutral. The space was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides offering panoramic views of the glittering city. The interior was minimalist and expensive, all white walls and dark wood and furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. But what caught her attention were the unexpected touches of warmth scattered throughout. Watercolor paintings hung on the walls, delicate landscapes, and abstract florals in soft colors. Photographs in simple frames showed a younger Jay with a beautiful woman who had his eyes and smile. His mother, Minji realized, seeing the same bone structure, the same curve of the lips. Welcome, Jay said, taking her bag. His voice was quieter here in his private space, less guarded than it had been at the restaurant. Thank you for coming. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, his feet bare on the polished hardwood floors, and the informality made him seem younger and somehow more vulnerable. His hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it, and Minji found herself noticing details she hadn't before. The way his shoulders filled out the sweater, the elegant line of his throat, the careful way he moved, like he was conscious of taking up space. Your home is beautiful, she said, because she needed to say something, and it was true. My mother decorated most of it before she died. I've kept it largely the same. He gestured toward the open kitchen. Are you hungry? I thought I'd cook for us instead of going out. The idea of Jay cooking was so unexpected that Minji almost laughed. You cook? My mother taught me. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was only half a person. He moved into the kitchen and began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. I hope you like japchae and bulgogi. They were her specialties. Minji found herself drawn to the kitchen island, watching as Jay laid out vegetables and beef and glass noodles with practiced efficiency. The kitchen was clearly well used despite its showroom appearance. The knife block worn from frequent handling, a small collection of Korean cookbooks tucked into a corner. "Can I help?" she asked. "You can talk to me. Tell me about Tae. How long has he been sick?" As Jay began preparing the meal, his hands moving with the kind of precision that suggested this was meditative for him, Minji found herself talking. She told him about her parents' accident, the drunk driver who'd crossed the median on the 10 freeway, about becoming Tae's guardian at 20 when she'd barely known how to take care of herself, about his diagnosis 2 years later, the progressive kidney disease that required careful management and periodic interventions. "He's the only family I have left," she said quietly, watching Jay's knife work as he sliced vegetables into perfect matchsticks. "Everything I do is for him." Jay looked up from his cutting board, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I understand that. Family is everything, even when it's painful. Especially then." They fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Jay cooked while Minji sat at the island, and they talked about their families, their losses, the weight of being the one left behind. He told her about his mother's love of art, how she'd painted every day despite his father's disapproval, how she'd been soft in a world that demanded hardness, and how that softness had made her a target. "My father loved her desperately," Jay said, stirring the bulgogi in its marinade. "But he couldn't protect her from his world. I think that broke something in him when she died. He turned all that love into control, into making sure our family was never vulnerable again." "And you?" Minji asked. "What did it turn you into?" He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the sizzle of meat hitting the hot pan. "I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out." He glanced at her. "But when you asked if I was okay that night at the restaurant, it was the first time in years anyone had asked what I felt instead of what I could do. The food was incredible, better than most restaurants Minji had eaten in." They sat at his dining table with the city lights spread below them like a carpet of stars, and Minji felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. Jay was easy to talk to when he wasn't performing the role of troubled heir or dangerous son. He was thoughtful, asking questions that showed he actually listened to her answers, sharing pieces of himself that felt genuine. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern emerged that felt almost like a normal relationship. If you ignored the bodyguard who followed at a discreet distance, and the fact that Jay's phone calls were often conducted in low-urgent Korean about territory and shipments and problems that needed handling. He picked her up from work most evenings, waiting in the Mercedes with that patient stillness that suggested he was comfortable with silence. They had dinner together, sometimes at exclusive restaurants where the staff knew him by name and treated him with wary respect, sometimes at his penthouse where he cooked, and she learned that he was meticulously organized and had strong opinions about the proper way to prepare kimchi. Minji found herself noticing things about him that made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. The way he moved with unconscious grace, all controlled power and careful precision. The rare smile that transformed his serious face into something warm and genuine. His hands, long-fingered and elegant, whether they were chopping vegetables or reaching to open a door for her. He was protective in ways both obvious and subtle. He always positioned himself between her and the door in restaurants. His hand rested on the small of her back when they walked through crowds. He checked in with her constantly, asking if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if she wanted to leave. When Tae's surgery date arrived, Jay showed up at the hospital at 6 in the morning without being asked. He sat with Minji in the waiting room for 7 hours, bringing her coffee and making sure she ate, offering quiet, steady presence while she worried herself sick. When the surgeon finally emerged with good news, Jay squeezed her hand, and she felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "Thank you," she'd whispered, "for being here. Where else would I be?" He'd responded, and the simple sincerity in his voice had made her chest ache. She was falling for him. The realization hit her one evening as they were cooking together in his kitchen, bumping elbows in the small space, laughing about some stupid joke he'd made. Her heart was racing just from being near him, her skin hypersensitive to every accidental touch. She found herself watching his mouth when he talked, wondering what it would feel like to kiss him, to have those careful hands on her skin. This was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with his family's criminal enterprises. This was her heart getting involved when this was supposed to be a transaction, a business arrangement. But Jay looked at her like she was precious, treated her like she mattered, and Minji was lonely enough and human enough to want that to be real. 2.5 weeks after she'd first entered his world, Jay told her his father wanted to meet her formally. Not the brief tense encounter at the restaurant, but a proper family dinner at the Huang compound. Minji's anxiety spiked immediately. "He wants to evaluate me," she said, "like I'm a potential business investment." Jay didn't deny it. "My father evaluates everything and everyone. But Minji, he already respects you. You calmed me down when no one else could. You've been good for me, and he sees that." The Huang compound was in Pacific Palisades, a sprawling estate behind high walls and multiple security checkpoints. The house itself was a blend of traditional Korean architecture and modern luxury, all dark wood and stone and carefully manicured gardens. Minji felt desperately out of place in her simple black dress, knowing that everything here probably cost more than she'd make in years. Jay's father, De-young, greeted them in a formal sitting room that overlooked an interior courtyard. He was exactly as intimidating as Minji remembered, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit despite being in his own home, his posture radiating authority. But his eyes, when they settled on Minji, were assessing rather than hostile. "Miss Kong, thank you for joining us." His Korean was formal, educated, the accent of someone who'd grown up in Seoul's elite circles. "Thank you for inviting me," Minji replied, matching his formality because she understood instinctively that this man would respect proper manners. A young woman appeared in the doorway, and Minji recognized her from the photographs in Jay's apartment. Soo-yeon was 22, beautiful in the same fine-boned way as her mother, with long dark hair and an expression that was considerably warmer than her father's. "You must be Minji," Soo-yeon said in English, her accent American despite her Korean features. "I've heard so much about you." She shot her brother a teasing look. "Appa talks about you constantly." Jay looked embarrassed, a flush creeping up his neck that Minji found endearing. "Soo-yeon," he warned. Dinner was elaborate, multiple courses of Korean dishes prepared by a private chef and served in a dining room that could have seated 20. Dae-young asked Minji questions about her family, her education, her work at Celestine. The questions felt like an interrogation disguised as polite conversation, and Minji understood she was being evaluated on every answer. "Your parents were educators," Dae-young said. "Teachers. That's honorable work." "They believed in service," Minji replied carefully, "in helping others build better lives. And yet you work as a server to support your brother's medical needs. Some might say your education was wasted." The comment could have been an insult, but Minji met his eyes directly. "My education taught me that pride is expensive and my brother's life is priceless. I'll do whatever work is necessary to keep him healthy." Something flickered in Dae-young's expression, there and gone too quickly to identify. He nodded once, a gesture that felt like approval. "You have strength hidden beneath softness. That's rare." Later, as Jay drove her back to the penthouse because she'd been staying there for safety, he seemed tense. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his jaw set in a hard line. "Are you okay?" Minji asked, echoing the question she'd first asked him weeks ago. "My father likes you." "That's good. But it also means he's going to have expectations." "What kind of expectations?" "That you're part of this now. Part of the family." He won't say it directly, but the way he looked at you tonight, the things he said. "He sees you as mine, and in his world. That means you're under his protection and subject to his rules." The words should have frightened her, should have made her want to run. But instead, Minji found herself reaching across the console to touch Jay's hand where it rested on the gear shift. "And are you okay with that? With me being yours?" He pulled the car over abruptly, parking on a quiet residential street under the shadow of a jacaranda tree. The sudden stop made Minji's heart jump, but then Jay was turning to face her, his eyes intense in the dim light from the dashboard. "I've been trying to be patient," he said, his voice rough, "trying to respect the boundaries of our arrangement. But Minji, this stopped being an arrangement for me weeks ago. You're not just someone I'm spending time with. You're the person I think about when I wake up and the last thought I have before I sleep. You're the reason I've started painting again, the reason I can get through the day without falling apart." Her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the intensity of his gaze, the carefully controlled want radiating from him. "Jay," she started, but she didn't know how to finish. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. "Tell me this is still just a transaction, and I'll respect that. I'll keep my distance. But if there's any chance you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I need to know." Instead of answering with words, Minji leaned across the console and touched his face, her palm against his jaw, feeling the tension there. His skin was warm, the faint stubble rough against her hand. His eyes widened slightly, hope and desire and uncertainty all visible in his expression. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I'm terrified of it, but I feel it." He moved slowly, giving her time to pull away, his hand coming up to cup the back of her neck with infinite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes." He closed the distance between them carefully, like she was something precious that might break. His lips touched hers softly at first, questioning, and Minji felt electricity shoot through her entire body. She pressed closer, her hand sliding into his hair, and the kiss deepened. Jay kissed like he did everything else, with focused intensity and careful attention. His mouth moved against hers with a skill that made her head spin, one hand tangled in her hair while the other cupped her face. Minji had been kissed before, but never like this, never with this combination of desire and tenderness that made her feel cherished and wanted in equal measure. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jay rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks." "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed you to want it too. Needed this to be real, not something you felt obligated to give me." Minji's phone buzzed in her purse, jarring and intrusive. She almost ignored it, too caught up in the moment, but something made her check. The screen showed a text from an unknown number, and when she opened it, her blood ran cold. It was a photograph of her and Jay, taken from a distance. They were walking together outside Celestine, his hand on her back, both of them smiling. But it was the message beneath the photo that made her hands start shaking. Pretty things break easily. The Korean characters were stark and threatening, and before she could even process it fully, Jay had taken the phone from her trembling hands. She watched his expression transform from tender to absolutely lethal, his eyes going hard and cold in a way that should have terrified her, but instead made her feel protected. He made 3 phone calls in rapid Korean, his voice clipped and commanding. Then he turned back to her, his face still hard but his touch gentle as he took her hands. "You're moving into the penthouse tonight. Not a request, not a suggestion. This threat is real, and I'm not taking chances with your safety. Jay, I can't just leave my apartment." "Yes, you can. I'll have your things packed and moved by tomorrow. You'll stay with me until this is resolved." His jaw was set in a line that suggested arguing would be pointless. "Someone is targeting you because of me, which means keeping you safe is my responsibility." Minji should have protested, should have insisted on maintaining her independence. But the photo on her phone was clear evidence that the danger was real and escalating. And more than that, the idea of staying with Jay, of waking up to him every morning and falling asleep knowing he was near, didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like something she wanted, danger or no danger. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll stay with you." Something in his expression softened slightly, though the protective edge remained. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." As Jay drove them back to his penthouse, one hand on the wheel and the other clasped tightly with hers, Minji looked out at Los Angeles spreading below them in a galaxy of lights. She'd entered this arrangement to save her brother, had agreed to spend time with a dangerous man from a dangerous world in exchange for medical bills. But somewhere along the way, surrounded by his mother's paintings and his careful cooking and his genuine loneliness that matched her own, she'd fallen in love. And now someone wanted to hurt her because of it, which meant there was no going back to her simple, safe life, even if she wanted to. The only way forward was deeper into Jay's world, deeper into the danger, and deeper into whatever this thing between them was becoming. Minji squeezed his hand tighter and chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could survive in even the darkest places. 1 week of living with Jay and Minji had learned his rhythms as intimately as her own heartbeat. He woke at 6 every morning without an alarm, moving through the penthouse with quiet efficiency. She'd hear the coffee maker start, smell the rich dark roast he preferred, and by the time she emerged from the guest bedroom he'd claimed she should use even though they both knew she'd rather be in his, there would be a cup waiting for her exactly how she liked it. 2 creams, 1 sugar. They'd fallen into a domestic routine that felt both natural and charged with constant awareness. Morning coffee on the balcony overlooking the city. Him driving her to work at Celestine, his hand resting on her thigh during the commute in a way that made her skin burn even through her jeans. Evenings cooking together, their bodies brushing in the kitchen's confines, every accidental touch sending sparks through her nervous system. Late nights talking on his couch, sitting close enough that she could feel his warmth, count his breaths, notice the way his eyes darkened when he looked at her mouth. The sexual tension between them was constant and overwhelming. Minji would catch him staring at her while she chopped vegetables, his gaze hungry in a way that made her pulse race. She'd watch him emerge from the shower with damp hair and bare feet, wearing only sweatpants that hung low on his hips, and have to remind herself to breathe. They'd kiss goodnight at her bedroom door. Kisses that started gentle and became desperate, hands tangling in hair and bodies pressed close, before one of them pulled away with visible effort. He was giving her control over when they took this further, she realized, waiting for her to decide she was ready. The restraint was visible in the tension of his shoulders, the careful way he touched her like she might disappear, the hunger in his eyes that he banked whenever she said goodnight and retreated to her separate room. On the 7th night, Minji woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of Jay crying out. The noise was muffled but distinct, coming from his bedroom down the hall. She lay still for a moment, uncertain if she should intrude, but then she heard it again and her body moved before her mind could catch up. His bedroom door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open to find him tangled in sheets, his face twisted in anguish even in sleep. The moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows cast everything in silver and shadow, and Minji could see the sheen of sweat on his skin, the way his hands clenched and released convulsively. "Jay," she said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed. Her hand touched his shoulder, warm and solid beneath her palm. "Jay, wake up. You're having a nightmare." He jolted awake with a gasp, his eyes wild and unfocused for a moment before recognition settled in. "Minji." His voice was rough, raw with whatever he'd been dreaming. "I'm sorry. Did I wake you? You were crying out." She didn't move her hand from his shoulder, could feel his heart racing beneath her touch. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jay sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist, and ran both hands through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as self-soothing. His chest was bare, and Minji tried not to stare at the lean muscle, the smooth skin. "It's always the same dream. I'm 16 again, at the restaurant with my mother. I see the men coming in, see the guns, but I can't move. Can't warn her. I just watch it happen over and over." Minji's heart ached for him. She shifted closer, her hand moving from his shoulder to his face, cupping his jaw. "You were a child. There was nothing you could have done. My father has never said that. He's never blamed me out loud, but I know he thinks if I'd been stronger, faster, more aware, I could have protected her." "That's not fair," Minji said fiercely. "You were 16 years old. Your father's grief is making him irrational." Jay leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. "You're the first person who's ever said that. Everyone else just expects me to be what he needs, to become the heir who never fails." "What do you want to be?" she asked quietly. "I don't know anymore. I used to paint, like my mother. I used to think about art school, about creating beautiful things. But that version of me died when she did." He opened his eyes, and in the moonlight they were dark and endless. "Or I thought he did. Then you asked if I was okay, and I remembered what it felt like to be seen as more than just the heir or the weapon." Minji didn't think, just acted on instinct. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close, and Jay's head came to rest against her shoulder. His arms encircled her waist, holding tight, and she felt the tension in his body slowly begin to ease. They stayed like that for long minutes, breathing together in the quiet darkness. Minji stroked his hair, felt his warmth seeping into her, and knew with absolute clarity that she loved this man. Not the dangerous heir or the Mafia son, but the person underneath who was broken and trying and so desperately lonely. When Jay finally pulled back, his hands came up to frame her face. His expression was intense, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I need to tell you everything. About my world, about what I've done, about who I really am. You deserve to know what you're choosing." So he told her. They moved to the balcony despite the late hour, wrapped in blankets against the cool night air, and Jay laid bare the reality of his life. He told her about growing up in a world where violence was currency and loyalty was everything. About watching his father build an empire through fear and strategy and ruthless efficiency. About his own initiation at 18, the things he'd had to do to prove himself worthy of the Huang name. "I've hurt people," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the city lights below rather than her face. "I've done things I'm not proud of. My hands aren't clean, Minji. I need you to understand that." She absorbed his words, processing the reality of who he was. A man capable of violence, raised in a world where that violence was expected and rewarded. But she also saw the guilt in his expression, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. This wasn't someone who took pleasure in cruelty. This was someone shaped by trauma and expectations trying to survive in an impossible situation. "Tell me about your mother," she said instead of responding to his confession directly. "Tell me who she was." Something in Jay's expression softened. "She was everything my father isn't. Gentle, creative, full of joy despite the darkness around her. She painted constantly, these beautiful watercolors of flowers and landscapes. She used to say that beauty was an act of rebellion in an ugly world." He talked about her for an hour, and Minji listened to the love in his voice, the grief that still sat fresh even a decade later. When he finally wound down, she shared her own story. Not just the facts she'd told him before, but the deep truth of it. The night of her parents' accident, how she'd been angry with them over something stupid before they left. How that anger was the last thing she'd felt before the police arrived at her door. How she'd become Tae's guardian while still drowning in survivor's guilt and the crushing weight of responsibility. "I was 20 and suddenly I had to be a parent," she said. "I had to be strong when I wanted to fall apart. I had to make decisions about his health and his future when I could barely take care of myself. And I've been so lonely, Jay, carrying all of it alone for 4 years." His hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers interlacing. "You're not alone anymore." Over the next few days, Minji watched Jay begin to change in small but significant ways. He started painting again, setting up an easel in the spare room, and working in the mornings before she woke. The paintings were abstract, full of dark colors and turbulent shapes that gradually softened into lighter tones. She encouraged him, asked questions, sat and watched him work with genuine interest. She met Soo-yeon for coffee one afternoon, and the younger woman was delightfully open and warm. "My brother is different with you," Soo-yeon said, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "He smiles more. He started painting again. My father has noticed too." "Is that good or bad?" Minji asked. "Good. My father values strength, and you've made Jay stronger." Soo-yeon reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I'm glad he found you. I was worried he'd never let anyone in." The integration into Jay's life felt natural in ways that should have frightened Minji, but instead filled her with a sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be, with this man in this strange new world. But the peace couldn't last. 10 days after she'd moved into the penthouse, Dae-young called an emergency meeting at his compound. Jay's expression when he received the call was grim, and Minji's stomach knotted with anxiety. "Is it about the threat?" she asked. "Yes. My father has identified who's been targeting you. We need to go now." The drive to Pacific Palisades was tense and silent. When they arrived, Dae-young was waiting in his office, a dark wood-paneled room that felt like the center of power. Maps of Los Angeles were spread across his desk, photographs of various men, and Minji felt Jay's hand tighten on hers as they entered. "Park Min-jae," Dae-young said without preamble, sliding a photograph across the desk. "He's the head of a rival organization, been trying to expand into our territory for the last 5 years. 3 years ago, his son was killed in a territorial dispute. We weren't responsible, but Park has convinced himself that my family orchestrated it." "What does that have to do with Minji?" Jay asked, his voice hard. "Revenge." Dae-young's eyes were cold, calculating. "Park has been watching you for months, waiting for a weakness. Miss Kong represents that weakness. He sees her as the perfect target, a way to hurt you the way he was hurt when he lost his son." Minji felt ice flood her veins. Someone wanted to hurt her not for anything she'd done, but simply because she mattered to Jay. The reality of his world crashed over her in waves. "What are we going to do?" Jay's hand was still gripping hers, almost painful in its intensity. "Eliminate the threat," Dae-young said flatly. Park has declared war whether he realizes it or not. We'll finish it before he makes his next move. The rest of the meeting was conducted in rapid Korean, too fast and technical for Minji to fully follow. But she understood enough. War, retaliation, protection. Her life had become something from a movie, except the danger was real and the man she loved was planning violence to keep her safe. When they returned to the penthouse, Minji was shaking with a combination of fear and adrenaline. Jay guided her inside, his hands gentle on her shoulders, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the dangerous edge in his eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know. Me too." He pulled her into his arms, and she pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent. "I won't let him hurt you. I promise." Minji looked up at him, at the fierce protectiveness in his expression, the way he held her like she was precious and breakable and worth fighting for. In that moment, surrounded by danger and uncertainty, she made a choice. She'd been holding back, sleeping in the guest room, maintaining some semblance of boundaries. But boundaries felt pointless now when everything was so fragile and uncertain. She rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. Fear and desire and trust and love all tangled together. Jay made a rough sound in his throat and kissed her back with an intensity that stole her breath. His hands slid into her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and Minji felt heat flood through her entire body. "Minji," he said against her mouth, his voice strained. "Tell me what you want." "You," she breathed. "I want you. All of you. Are you sure? Because once we do this, once I have you, I won't be able to let you go. I don't want you to let go." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I love you, Jay. I choose this. Choose you, choose us." Something in his expression broke open, all the careful control shattering. "I love you," he said fiercely. "God, Minji, I love you so much it terrifies me." He kissed her again, and this time there was no restraint, no holding back. His hands moved over her body with reverent intensity, learning the shape of her, and Minji felt herself responding with equal hunger. They moved to his bedroom without breaking contact, stumbling slightly, too focused on each other to care about grace. Jay laid her on his bed with infinite gentleness despite the desire burning in his eyes. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and Minji felt tears prick her eyes at the tenderness in his expression. "Are you crying?" His thumb brushed away the moisture at the corner of her eye. "We can stop." "No. I'm crying because I never thought anyone would look at me like this. Like I'm precious. You are precious. You're everything." What followed was slow and intense, and deeply emotional. Jay touched her like she was something sacred, his hands and mouth exploring with focused attention that made her feel worshipped. He asked permission at every stage, checking in constantly, making sure she was comfortable and wanted this. The care he showed, the way he prioritized her pleasure and comfort over his own urgency, made Minji fall even more deeply in love with him. When they finally came together, it felt like more than just physical intimacy. It felt like a promise, a commitment, a joining of two people who'd been lonely for too long and had finally found home in each other. Jay held her gaze the entire time, his eyes dark and intense and full of emotion that matched her own. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his sheets, skin to skin, hearts still racing. Jay's hand stroked through her hair with absent gentleness, and Minji felt safer than she had in years despite the very real danger lurking outside these walls. "This stopped being an arrangement a long time ago," Jay said quietly into the darkness. "You know that, right? This is real. You're mine and I'm yours, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect that." Minji pressed closer, her head on his chest where she could hear his heartbeat strong and steady. "I know. I'm terrified of what might happen, but I know what we have is real. Whatever comes next, we face it together." His arms tightened around her. "No more holding back, no more separate rooms. You're with me now in every way." She nodded against his chest, and despite the danger, despite the threats and the violence and the impossible world she'd entered, Minji felt something settle in her soul. This was where she belonged, with this man who'd been broken and was slowly healing, who protected her with fierce devotion, who looked at her like she hung the moon. They'd chosen each other despite every logical reason not to, had found love in the darkest circumstances, and Minji believed with her whole heart that it was worth fighting for. worth whatever came next. The call came at 3 in the afternoon 2 days after Minji and Jae had finally become a real couple in every sense. She was at the penthouse reviewing study materials for a potential return to college when Jae's phone rang. She watched his expression transform from relaxed to lethal in the span of a single breath, his entire body going rigid as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he ended the call, his face was a mask of cold fury that reminded Minji that beneath the gentle man who cooked for her and held her through nightmares was someone capable of extreme violence. "What happened?" she asked, her heart already racing with dread. "Park has Tae." His voice was flat, emotionless in a way that was more frightening than anger. "He wants me to come to a warehouse in Koreatown. Alone. If I bring anyone or contact the police, he'll kill him." The words hit Minji like a physical blow. Her vision swam, and she had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. Tae, her baby brother, the only family she had left, in the hands of a man who wanted revenge through pain. "No." Her voice came out broken. "No, no, no." Jae was at her side immediately, his hands on her shoulders steadying her even as his expression remained dangerously calm. "Breathe, Minji. I'm going to get him back. I promise you, I will bring him home." She forced air into her lungs, forced herself to think through the panic. "It's a trap. He wants you to come alone because he plans to kill you both." "I know, which is why I'm not going alone." He pulled out his phone and started making calls, rapid Korean commands that Minji only half followed through the rushing in her ears. Within 20 minutes, Dae-young arrived at the penthouse with 4 of his most trusted men. The older man's expression was grim, but focused as Jae briefed him on the situation. Park had sent a photo of Tae bound to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, bruised but alive. The message was clear. This was bait, but it was bait they had to take. "We go in force," Dae-young said, studying a map of Koreatown on his tablet. "Surround the warehouse, cut off escape routes, move fast." "I'm going with you," Minji said, her voice stronger than she felt. Every man in the room turned to look at her. Jae's expression was immediate denial. "Absolutely not. You're staying here where it's safe." "Safe?" Minji felt anger cut through her fear, sharpening her thoughts. "My brother is being used as bait because of me. Because I matter to you. I'm not hiding while you risk everything. Minji, this is going to be violent. Dangerous. People are going to get hurt, probably killed." Jae's voice was strained, caught between his protective instincts and something else. "I can't focus on getting Tae out if I'm worried about you." "Then don't worry about me. Trust me." She stepped closer, meeting his eyes directly. "I chose this life. I chose you knowing what it meant, knowing your world is brutal and dangerous. You don't get to sideline me now when it matters most. Tae is my brother. I have a right to be there." She saw him wavering, saw the conflict in his expression. Before he could refuse again, Dae-young spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "The girl has a point. Park is expecting you to come alone or with soldiers. He won't expect you to bring her. That could be an advantage." Jae turned to his father with disbelief. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious." Dae-young's gaze shifted to Minji, assessing and calculating. "You were right about her, Jae. She has strength hidden beneath softness. Park will underestimate her, and that's a weapon we can use." A plan formed quickly, brutally efficient. Minji would enter the warehouse with Jae, presenting exactly what Park expected to see. The woman Jae loved, the weak point he could exploit. But Dae-young's men would already be in position, hidden around the perimeter. Minji would wear a wire so they could hear everything. When the moment was right, when Park revealed himself fully, Minji would give a signal and they'd move in. Jae pulled her aside while his father coordinated with the security team. "This is insane. If anything happens to you, if Park touches you, I'll lose my mind." Minji cupped his face in her hands, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Then we make sure nothing happens. We get Tae out, we end this threat, and we go home together. All of us." His eyes searched hers, and she saw fear there alongside the love. "Promise me you'll run if things go wrong. Promise me you'll save yourself. Only if you promise the same." He kissed her hard, desperate, and Minji kissed him back with everything she had. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you. Whatever happens in there, you need to know that loving you has been the best thing in my entire life. I love you too. Now let's go get my brother." The warehouse was in an industrial area of Koreatown, surrounded by other abandoned buildings and empty lots. Dusk was falling as they approached, the sky streaked with orange and purple. Minji could see Dae-young's men taking positions, shadows moving with practiced stealth. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs, but her hands were steady. Jae parked the car a block away as instructed. Before they got out, he turned to her one more time. The signal is you touching your left ear. That's when we move. Until then, stay close to me and don't react no matter what he says. Understood? Understood. They walked to the warehouse entranced together, Jae's hand resting protectively on her lower back. The metal door was partially open, and the interior was dim and cavernous, full of old equipment and shadows. As her eyes adjusted, Minji saw them. Tae was tied to a chair in the center of the space, his face bruised and one eye swollen shut. Relief flooded through her that he was alive, followed immediately by rage at whoever had hurt him. Around the perimeter stood at least a dozen men in dark clothes, all armed, all watching with cold eyes. And standing beside Tae was Park Min-jae. He was in his 50s, barrel-chested and radiating cruelty. His smile was all teeth and no warmth when he saw them enter. "Jae Hwang," he said in Korean, his voice mocking. "And you brought your pretty pet. How considerate." Jae's hand tightened on Minji's back in warning. "Let the boy go, Park. Your issue is with me and my father, not with civilians." "Civilians?" Park laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty space. "There are no civilians in our world, boy. There are only assets and liabilities. This one," he gestured to Tae, "is leverage. And that one," he nodded at Minji, "is the weakness I've been waiting for." Minji made herself step forward, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. If you wanted revenge on the Hwang family, why hide behind a college student? Why not face them directly? Park's attention focused on her, his eyes narrowing. "You have spirit. I can see why Jae is smitten. Too bad you chose the wrong side, little girl. His son was barely older than your brother when he died. Did Jae tell you about that? About how the Hwangs orchestrated his death?" "We had nothing to do with your son's death," Jae said, his voice hard. "He got caught in crossfire between the Nakamura family and the Mexicans. You know this. You've always known this." "I know what your father told me," Park spat. "I know that my son is dead and yours is standing here with his whore. That's what I know." Minji saw Jae tense beside her, saw his hands clench into fists. The air felt electric with impending violence. Park was still talking, monologuing about his grief and his rage, about how he'd waited years for the perfect opportunity to make Dae-young suffer the way he'd suffered. "And now I have it," Park said, pulling a gun from his waistband. "I'm going to kill the boy first while you watch. Then the girl. Then you. And your father will know that his family died because he couldn't protect them, just like I couldn't protect my son." As Park raised the gun toward Tae, Minji made her move. She reached up casually, as if brushing her hair back, and touched her left ear. The signal. Everything happened at once. The warehouse's high windows shattered as Dae-young's men came through, ropes and precision and overwhelming force. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Jae grabbed Minji and pulled her down behind a concrete pillar, his body covering hers protectively. Through the chaos, Minji could see Park's men being systematically neutralized by the Hwang organization soldiers. They moved with brutal efficiency, each shot precise and deadly. Park himself was trying to get to Tae, using him as a shield, but Deng's second-in-command cut him off. "Stay here," Jae commanded, and then he was moving, flowing through the violence with a grace that was terrifying and beautiful. Minji watched him take down two of Park's men who'd gotten between him and Tae, watched the cold efficiency with which he eliminated threats. Park saw Jae coming and made a desperate move, abandoning Tae to lunge toward Minji's hiding spot. "If I can't have my revenge through the boy, I'll take it through her," he snarled, his gun swinging toward her. Minji froze, staring at the barrel pointed at her chest, time seeming to slow. But then Jae was there, intercepting with lethal speed. The confrontation was brutal and quick. Jae moved with absolute precision, disarming Park and driving him back with strikes that were meant to disable and destroy. Park went down hard, blood spreading across the concrete floor, and Jae stood over him with cold eyes. "This is for threatening what's mine," he said quietly, and fired once. The warehouse fell silent except for heavy breathing and the shuffle of Daeyoung's men securing the space. Minji's ears were ringing, her heart still racing with adrenaline. Jae turned to her immediately, his hands running over her body checking for injuries. Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you? I'm okay. Tae, we need to get to Tae. They ran to where her brother was still tied to the chair, and Minji's hands shook as she worked on the ropes. Tae's eyes were wide with shock and fear, but he was alive. When the ropes fell away, he collapsed into her arms. I'm sorry, he gasped. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. They just grabbed me outside the library. Shoo, you're safe now. You're safe. Minji held him tight, feeling tears stream down her face. Daeyoung approached, his suit somehow still immaculate despite the violence. The threat is eliminated. All of Park's men are either dead or will be handled. He looked at Minji with something that might have been respect. You did well. That signal timing was perfect. In the aftermath, as they drove Tae to a private Dr. Daeyoung kept on retainer, Minji felt herself shaking with delayed reaction. She'd just witnessed multiple deaths, had watched Jae kill a man, had been part of orchestrating a violent confrontation. The reality of it was crashing over her in waves. At the penthouse later that night, after Tae had been treated and was sleeping in the guest room under heavy sedation, Minji sat on the bathroom floor and let herself fall apart. Her hands were shaking so badly, she couldn't hold them still, her breath coming in short gasps. Jae found her there, kneeling beside her without a word. She'd noticed the cut above his eyebrow, the bruising on his knuckles, the way he moved slightly stiffly. Evidence of the violence he'd engaged in to protect her and Tae. I watched you kill someone, she said quietly. I watched you move through that warehouse like death itself, and I should be terrified. I should be running. But all I feel is grateful that you're capable of that violence, because it kept us alive. His expression was carefully neutral. You can leave now if you want. Tae is safe. The threat is eliminated. You don't owe me anything, Minji. If tonight showed you that this life is too much, I'll understand. She looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the man who'd been broken by his mother's death, and had found purpose in protecting her. Saw the careful control he maintained over his dangerous nature. Saw the love in his eyes despite the fear that she'd walk away. I'm not leaving. She took his bruised hand in hers, brought it to her lips, and kissed his knuckles gently. I chose you knowing exactly what your world entails. Tonight just proved that you'll do whatever it takes to protect the people you love. That doesn't scare me, Jae. It makes me love you more. Something in his expression cracked, vulnerability flooding through. I've spent 10 years being what my father needed. The weapon, the heir, the enforcer. But tonight, protecting you and Tae, that felt different. That felt like purpose instead of obligation. Minji pulled him down to sit beside her on the bathroom floor, and they held each other in the quiet aftermath of violence. Outside, Los Angeles continued its endless sprawl, but here in this moment they were just two people who'd survived the worst and chosen each other anyway. The next morning, Daeyoung arrived at the penthouse with unexpected news. Park's organization had collapsed with his death, his territory being absorbed by neutral parties. The threat was completely eliminated, no remnants left to seek revenge. My son has changed, Daeyoung said to Minji while Jae was checking on Tae. He has found something worth protecting beyond obligation. You have given him that. His eyes, so similar to Jae's but hardened by decades of violence, held a hint of warmth. Welcome to the family, Miss Kong. Officially. Later, Minji stood with Jae on the balcony watching the sun set over the city. Tae was recovering, the external threat was gone, and somehow they'd survived intact. More than intact. They'd emerged from the fire stronger, more committed, absolutely certain of what they meant to each other. Thank you, Jae said quietly, his arm around her waist. For not running. For staying. For seeing me as more than just a killer. Thank you for protecting us. For loving me enough to let me have agency in my own rescue. For being exactly who you are. They stood together as darkness fell and the city lights began to sparkle below them. Two people transformed by violence and love into something neither had expected to become. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the warehouse, Minji sat in Jae's penthouse watching Tae attempt to beat him at a video game. Her brother's bruises had faded to yellow and green, the swelling around his eye completely gone, and the sound of his laughter as Jae's character fell off a cliff filled her with a warmth that bordered on painful. You're terrible at this, Tae said, grinning at Jay with the easy affection of someone who decided to trust completely. "I'm letting you win," Jay protested, but the smile on his face gave him away. He was genuinely bad at video games, something that delighted Tay to no end. Minji had worried about how Tay would react to the truth about Jay's world, about what he'd witnessed at the warehouse. But her brother had surprised her with his resilience and understanding. "He saved my life," Tay had said simply when she'd tried to explain. "I don't care what his family does. I care that he loves you, and he protected both of us." Now, watching them together, Minji felt pieces of her life clicking into place. The two most important people in her world, finding their own relationship independent of her. Jay had offered to pay for Tay's college tuition, and when her brother had hesitated, uncertain about accepting more help, Jay had simply said that family took care of family. The word had made Tay's eyes shine with barely concealed emotion. She'd quit her job at Celestine the week before. Not because Jay had asked her to, but because she'd finally allowed herself to dream again. The art therapy program at UCLA had accepted her application, impressed by her essay about using creativity as healing for trauma survivors. Classes started in the fall, and Jay had been more excited about it than she was, already planning to convert the spare room into a proper studio for her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Soo-yeon asking if she wanted to go shopping that weekend, followed by several excited emojis. Jay's sister had become a genuine friend, someone Minji could talk to about the strangeness of entering this world, about loving someone whose life was complicated by violence and power. That evening, after Tay had returned to his dorm with promises to come back for dinner on Sunday, Jay asked Minji to get dressed up. "Somewhere nice," he said, that mysterious smile playing at his lips that made her heart skip. She wore a simple black dress that Soo-yeon had helped her pick out, elegant and understated. When she emerged from the bedroom, Jay's expression made her blush. "You're beautiful," he said, like the words were pulled from him involuntarily. They drove through Los Angeles as the sun began to set, heading toward the hills. Minji watched the city spread below them, thinking about how much had changed in just 2 months. She'd entered Jay's world to save her brother and found herself transformed. No longer just surviving, but actually living. Building a future instead of just enduring the present. When they pulled up to a traditional Korean garden tucked into the hillside, Minji felt her breath catch. The entrance was marked by a simple wooden gate, and beyond it stretched a carefully cultivated landscape of stone paths, water features, and meticulously pruned trees. The evening light cast everything in gold and amber. "My mother loved this place," Jay said quietly, helping her out of the car. "She used to bring Soo-yeon and me here when we were children. Said it was important to remember beauty and peace existed even in our chaotic world." They walked the stone path together, Jay's hand warm in hers. The garden was empty of other visitors, and Minji suspected he'd arranged for privacy. Traditional Korean architecture dotted the landscape, small pavilions and moon gates that framed perfect views. The sound of water trickling over stones provided a soothing backdrop. He led her to a central pavilion overlooking a koi pond. The structure was open-sided, with a peaked roof and wooden benches. Lanterns were beginning to glow as dusk deepened, and Minji noticed that the pavilion had been decorated with her favorite flowers, white peonies that her mother used to grow. "Jay, this is beautiful," she said, turning to him. But he was no longer standing beside her. He dropped to one knee, a small velvet box in his hands, and Minji felt her heart stop completely. "2 months ago, you asked a stranger if he was okay when everyone else just wanted him gone," Jay said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saw past the chaos and anger to the person underneath. You took a risk on someone broken and dangerous, and you've spent every day since showing me what it means to be loved unconditionally." Tears were already streaming down Minji's face, her hands covering her mouth. "You brought me back to life, Minji. You taught me that compassion isn't weakness but the strongest thing a person can offer. You've helped me find purpose beyond obligation, shown me that I can be both my father's son and someone who creates beauty instead of just destruction." He opened the box to reveal a ring that took her breath away. Simple platinum band with a single diamond, elegant and understated. "This was my mother's ring. My father gave it to her when they were young, before the violence and the empire. It represents a love that survived in impossible circumstances, just like ours." Minji couldn't speak, could only nod as tears continued to fall. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're beside me. I want to support your dreams and share mine with you. I want to create something good together, something my mother would be proud of. Marry me, Minji. Choose me every day for the rest of our lives. Yes, she managed to choke out. Yes, of course, yes. He stood and slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness, and Minji kissed him back, while crying and laughing simultaneously. I love you so much, she said against his mouth. I choose you. I choose us. Every day, forever. They held each other in the pavilion as night fell completely and the lanterns glowed brighter. Minji thought about the journey that had brought them here. The chaos at Celestine that could have been just a strange story to tell, but instead became the beginning of everything. Her decision to see a person instead of a problem. His willingness to be vulnerable with someone who didn't want anything from him except his genuine self. It shouldn't have worked. The waitress and the Mafia heir, the woman drowning in medical debt, and the man drowning in grief and expectations. But somehow, they'd found in each other exactly what they needed. Not someone to fix them, but someone to witness their brokenness and love them anyway. Do you think your mother would approve? Minji asked later, as they sat side by side watching the koi drift lazily through the illuminated water. Jay was quiet for a moment, his thumb rubbing circles on her hand where his mother's ring now sat. I think she would have loved you. You're like her in some ways. Soft but strong. Compassionate but not naive. She always believed that beauty and kindness could exist even in dark places. You've proven her right. Tell me what happens now, Minji said. After everything we've been through, what does our future look like? We get married, Jay said simply. You go to UCLA and become the best art therapist they've ever trained. I work with my father, but also start building something legitimate with Suyun, maybe an art foundation in my mother's name. Tae finishes college and probably gives us grief about being too lovey-dovey. We build a life that honors both where we've been and where we're going. And the violence? The danger? Will always be part of my world to some degree, Jay acknowledged. But the immediate threats are gone, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you're protected and cherished. You and any family we build together. The words sent a thrill through her. Family. Children who would grow up knowing both worlds, who would be taught that strength and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. A future built on the foundation of this unexpected love. As they prepared to leave the garden, Minji turned back one last time to look at the pavilion. She thought about all the people who might judge her choices, who would see only the surface, the Mafia connection, and the danger. But those people hadn't seen what she'd seen, hadn't known the loneliness of carrying everything alone, hadn't felt the desperate need to save someone you loved, hadn't experienced the profound gift of being truly seen by another person. Looking back now, thinking about where you come from, would people there have walked away from someone like Jay, or would they have taken the chance on compassion like she did? Everyone's journey is different, but sometimes the greatest risk leads to the greatest reward. 1 year later, Minji stood in the bathroom of their new house in the Hollywood Hills, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her hands. The house was smaller than the penthouse, but theirs together, filled with her art supplies and his mother's paintings and evidence of the life they'd built. She was in her second year of the art therapy program, working with trauma survivors and finding profound meaning in helping others heal. Jay had indeed started the foundation with Suyun, supporting young Korean-American artists while also managing certain aspects of his father's empire that couldn't be abandoned entirely. The balance was delicate but manageable. Tae was thriving at UCLA, majoring in computer science and dating a girl he was clearly head over heels for. He'd become close with Jay, the two of them meeting for lunch every week, and Minji loved watching their relationship develop independent of her. She heard Jay's car pull into the driveway and took a breath, the test still clutched in her hand. When he walked through the door, she didn't say anything, just held it up for him to see. His expression cycled through confusion, understanding, and then pure joy in the span of seconds. Are you serious? We're having a baby? We're having a baby. He crossed the room in 3 strides and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while laughing. When he set her down, his hands went to her still flat stomach with reverent gentleness. A baby. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, even though the answer was written all over his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You've given me everything, Minji. A reason to be better. A purpose beyond obligation. And now a family of our own. That weekend, they visited his mother's grave in a quiet cemetery overlooking the ocean. Jay knelt and placed fresh flowers on the headstone. White peonies like the ones that had decorated the pavilion where he'd proposed. Mom, I want you to meet someone, he said quietly, and Minji felt tears prick her eyes. This is Minji, my wife. She's everything you hoped I'd find. Kind and strong, and so full of love. And in about 7 months, you're going to be a grandmother. Minji knelt beside him and added her own flowers to the arrangement. Thank you for teaching him compassion, she said to the headstone. Thank you for showing him that beauty matters. He's become an incredible man, and I see your influence in him every day. They sat together in the quiet cemetery, the ocean wind gentle on their faces, and Minji thought about the journey that had brought them here. From chaos in a restaurant to a life filled with purpose and love. From loneliness and grief to connection and hope. Later, they returned to the Korean garden where Jay had proposed. It had become their special place, somewhere they came to celebrate and reflect. They walked the familiar stone paths hand in hand, and Minji's other hand rested on her stomach where their daughter was growing. She's going to be surrounded by so much love, Jay said, his eyes on Minji's hand. Your compassion, my father's protection, Suyun's joy, Tae's humor. She'll know both worlds and hopefully take the best from each. We'll teach her that strength and kindness aren't opposites, Minji added. That you can be powerful and gentle. That love is worth fighting for. They settled in the pavilion as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The city spread below them, millions of lights beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. Somewhere out there were people living their own complicated lives, making their own impossible choices, finding their own unexpected paths to happiness. Minji leaned against Jay's shoulder, his arms secure around her, and felt absolutely certain that she'd made the right choice. The choice to see a broken person instead of a problem. The choice to offer compassion when everyone else offered judgment. The choice to love someone dangerous and complicated and absolutely worth it. The chaos that brought us together turned into the greatest blessing of my life, she said quietly. Mine too. Jay kissed the top of her head. You asked if I was okay that night, and you've spent every day since making sure the answer is yes. They sat together as night fell completely over Los Angeles. Two people who'd been broken finding wholeness in each other, building a future filled with love and purpose and the knowledge that compassion could indeed survive and thrive even in the darkest places. The garden around them bloomed with life and beauty, a testament to what could grow when given the right care and attention. Just like their love, just like the family they were building together, just like the life they'd chosen despite every reason not to.